The COVID-19 pandemic affected almost every country in the world. It made its original fall in the U.S. in February and March of 2020, shutting down almost every school and making a transition to fully remote learning. Nearly 93% of households with school-aged children reported some form of distance learning throughout COVID-19. Here at Monomoy, we spent the last 3 months of the 2019 to 2020 school year with fully remote learning via Google Meet. The following year, the elementary and middle schools had full in-person curriculum, while the high school remained with hybrid learning. With this upcoming March being the 3-year anniversary of schools shutting down, Monomoy can say with confidence that they've spent the last 2 years with a full in-person schedule. But how did this quick and confusing transition affect the students? Explain your experience throughout school in the past 2 to 3 years.
In the past 2 to 3 years, it was complicated. It was hard due to the fact that we just didn't know exactly what to do, and there was no paper copies for everything. Subjects we needed to do on paper for homework or just classwork, it was very hard to do because we didn't have all the equations, and sometimes printing out papers would not go as well.
It's been kind of hard, especially like online learning. It didn't like click with me. I think learning in person is just like better. It's more hands-on, and that's like how I learn.
Over the last 2 years, I feel like I lost my attention span for work. I've been a very work-oriented, very persistent student and had good grades. But over quarantine and the past 2 years, been slacking a lot, and I don't have as long as an attention span to really do my work. I still try my best, but it's just harder.
The past 2 years, school's been really different because COVID affected a lot of things. We're a lot more cautious of who we're around and what we're doing.
Has the pandemic affected how you learn both inside and outside of school?
I would say so. My motivation definitely has decreased since COVID. The isolation just from all my friends just kind of put me in a spiral, I guess you could say.
I think definitely a lot in school because, I don't know, it just changed the way I interact with people because I stayed at home for the first year. I was completely online, and I came back to school last year, and it was very weird having to interact with people again in a way I hadn't before.
Yes, the pandemic has affected how I learn. Online, it is hard. We don't have all the resources as normal because we can't ask the teacher directly. That will disturb the class. It takes a while with email, it takes forever.
It definitely has, we're a lot more online and a lot more things on the computer. And outside school, I feel they don't give as much homework at all.
As the fully remote year came to a close, and with the hybrid year approaching, many in the district had no idea what the following year would consist of, whether it was students, teachers, parents, or even the principal, Miss Jennifer Police.
So I think at face value, I think the toughest part about it was it had never been done before, right? So there was no training. There was nothing that we could really tap our teachers into to help them prepare for what hybrid teaching looks like, right? So they were basically learning and implementing at the same time. On top of that, we would say the same thing for our students, right? You had never been through something like that before. There was no training for you. It's not like you had come through a system which had trained you how to stay motivated from your bedroom in your pajamas on your remote learning day, right? That's difficult. I think the fact that there was no training, whether it was for teachers or students, that was incredibly challenging. Second to that, I think the lack of social interactions as a result of that was obviously very devastating. There's been a lot of research that has supported that. We started to slowly add on to the school day, right? And that was by design to sort of slowly get kids back into the idea of a full schedule because you guys were coming in at 10:30, so you had a shortened school day. So we started to sort of add on to the school day to phase people back into full-time learning. We actually gave people an option to continue to learn from home. I don't know if you remember that. Very few students elected to continue to stay remote. So I think that told us everything that we needed to know. honestly, in looking back, I think that the positives outweighed the challenges because we were back in the building together. We were seeing each other every single day. It was the best decision at the time, for sure.
At first, the teaching online was really difficult. I didn't really know what I was doing, and we thought we were going to be gone for 2 weeks, and then it turned into the rest of the year. Once the novelty wore off, the kids stopped showing up, or they wouldn't put on their cameras, so a lot of times I would have like a class of 1 or 2, which kind of, made it difficult and that kind of thing. And we were also really supposed to focus more on mental health than academics, so I feel like academically speaking, the end of that first year we went online was sort of a loss.
Monomoy's story is not unique, however, because every school across the country was put in a similar situation compared to Monomoy. The true difference was the students at these schools. How did the reactions to online learning differ? How has the pandemic taken a toll on you mentally?
Mentally, it's pushed me back from school and my mental health, because I would sit at home and do nothing for most of my classes because I was done with all my work in about 40 minutes for the whole day. And it's just really hard to work when something is not happening.
I've always struggled with mental health and depression and anxiety since I was really little, but I mean, for everyone, including me, the pandemic kind of heightened those emotions. I had to go to therapy and start taking meds because it was really hard for me, and I didn't have many friends because of how isolated I became online, but I didn't know how to come back to school really and know how to learn like that anymore.
Mentally, I feel like we're all more stressed out, like easier, like we all get stressed out over little things than before.
It really just made me feel isolated, like I didn't really have anyone.
Feeling alone and isolated was a common emotion across the globe during the pandemic. The world flipped upside down, as well as the isolation by force made many teenagers across the U.S. feel the most anxiety, stress, and potential depression that they have ever felt.
Stress is a difficult thing for me to talk about in a sense, because I feel like as a whole, society-wise, we need to work on how we manage stress. I think that I'm seeing students handle stress a lot differently than they had a few years ago. I think we need to do a better job at learning what stress is and developing coping strategies to manage stress, because stress is a normal part of life, and everyone's going to experience stress at some point in their life. And I think that we have to work a little bit harder at understanding what stress is and how to develop coping strategies to manage stress. So I think that our levels of stress, especially here in high school right now, everything is so competitive. There's a lot of pressure with college, there's a lot of pressure with class ranking and GPAs, and I think that type of stress, we just have to work a little bit harder at trying to figure out ways to manage that and how to make it. I think there's been more discussion about mental health. We see it here in our community, we've seen it in the news, we've seen it nationally. And I think that talking about mental health is really important. We all have mental health needs that we need to take care of, just like we have our physical health needs. We go to the doctor every year to make sure that we're physically healthy. I think it's also important to check in that we're mentally healthy. I think part of this ties into how students manage stress. A lot of it is, time management, sleep, what we have to do, what we're filling up our plate with, and if we're able to manage all of that. There are resources available if people need a higher level of care, like a hospitalization, a therapist, medication, but it's so unique and individual to everybody. But I think just opening up the lines of communication and having a dialogue about it is super important, and the best things that we can do to start the conversation.
45,979 people died due to mental health-related sickness or suicide in 2020, according to the CDC. That is approximately 1 death every 11 minutes, and the majority of these deaths consisted of people from the ages of 13 to 19.
Again, I think when you go 18 months, you tend to create new habits of mind, which was people started to rely on, I would say, isolation.
Despite challenges, physical and mental, the Monomoy Regional School District was able to push through the pandemic and return to an almost normal school life again in 2023. Even prior to COVID-19, everyone goes through their own struggles outside of school hours, whether it is education-based or not. Depression, anxiety, and other mental illnesses have taken a larger role, in teenagers specifically, in this past decade. Monomoy's teachers and staff have welcomed students back with open arms into the building and have taken many courses on mental health in order to support their students to the best of their ability. Through thick and thin, Monomoy has learned to persevere through the toughest challenge in our school's history.